Welcome back to Checkpoint. Thanks for staying with us. The hashtag to use on social media is Checkpoint. Today we're discussing the economy of the country as it is today. It's turning out to be quite the campaign issue, with either side of the political divide claiming that they are the ones that hold the best promise for economic growth in the country. So what do you think between the two, Jubilee and NASA? Who offers, do you think, the better economic policies for this country? Has Jubilee delivered on its promises so far? Please keep your comments coming in. Let's discuss this now with my guests, and they're joining me tonight. I'm in the hands of good people who understand economics, starting with Simeha, who, JME, we will find out what that means in a moment, is a consultant on governance and public administration. Next to him, we have Ndiritu Murithi, who many of you will remember was a former member of parliament for Laikipia West, but more importantly, was a former assistant minister in the Ministry of Industrialization. And Anzetse Were, whom you know very well here on Checkpoint, a development economist. Thank you, ladies, gentlemen, for joining us. Anzetse, I want to start with you.
Sure.
The state of the economy right now, there was a promise of double-digit growth, and there's perhaps people who would want an understanding of where the economy is right now, devoid of all the political rhetoric.
Yeah, well, you know, the reason both sides are claiming things is because there's a bit of a conflicting reality going on in terms of the economy of the country. On one hand, we're doing quite well. We grew at about 5.9% last year. And if you juxtapose that with a growth rate of 1.4% for Africa and 3.4% for the world, Kenya is doing fairly well. We also are one of the top FDI destinations in Africa, and we were voted the top in Middle Eastern Africa. So on one hand, the economy is doing well, we're growing robustly. But on the other hand, we're seeing a lot of companies shutting down, moving out. We're seeing a lot of job attrition, and now, of course, we're seeing the effects of the drought. So, and the drought really has the effect of pushing up inflation. So it's pushing up the prices of food. People are also losing their wealth. They're losing their crops. They're losing their livestock, and those are assets that they used to have. So there are people who are poorer this year than they were last year. And there's also the reality that money goes a lot less further this year, especially as the price of oil begins to kick up. So there are those two realities where on one hand, you know, parts of the economy are doing very well, and we're doing very well compared to the rest of Africa. But on the other hand, there are serious problems that are beginning to cause strife for a lot of people.
All right. Would you say the same for the entire period? Jubilee has been, the Jubilee administration has been at the helm of this country, say, since 2013. There's people who say, well, there's a sense in which we don't feel, you know, the economic growth. I mean, there's huge investments in infrastructure. What would you say, like overall, for the last 4 years?
Well, you know, the truth of the matter is that this administration continued what the previous one was, which is the emphasis on infrastructure and using infrastructure as sort of a catalyst for economic growth and trying to get that multiplier effect so that it stimulates other parts of the economy. So I haven't seen any real structural change in strategy. The double-digit growth has always been a pipe dream. And I don't think, because Jubilee hasn't necessarily structurally changed economic strategy, for example, beginning to push for industrialization or manufacturing in a more concrete manner. We're seeing a lot of the economy just ticking along quite well. So I think one of the concerns I'm having is that we're not seeing this administration addressing a lot of the weaknesses that are beginning to emerge, one of which is fiscal policy and our growing debt. We've gone above our debt ceiling of GDP to debt ratio, and of course they're saying IMF says we're fine, but why do we have ceilings if we're not going to listen to them? So I think debt is one of our biggest problems, and our expenditure that's ballooning. And I think one of the other things that Kenyans are really beginning to feel this year is a combination of the drought, as I said. Also, it's an election year, so generally it tends to be a bit slower on election years.
All right, with people sort of holding back a wait-and-see attitude with that. Ndiritu, you were in the Ministry of Industrialization, and Zetse is saying she hasn't seen any sort of policies towards industrialization and manufacturing, which, you know, is a labor-intensive sector.
Well, yeah, and I think let me start on this question that it's an election year.
Yeah.
If you look at history, it does not support the view that the economy slows down in an election year. In the last election year, growth was 5.7%. In the previous election year, growth was actually 7.2%.
All right.
Now,
Let me challenge you on those numbers a little bit, because you're bringing that up. The Institute for Economic Affairs has done a study, and they've talked about the economy slowing down in 3 of 5 multi-party elections in the country and 2 of 5 single-party elections. But like really over the last 5 multi-party elections, it has slowed down in 3 of those and takes about 8 months to pick up.
Look, I'm talking about 2013. 2013, the economy grew by 5.7%. I mean, that is the data that is available. In the previous year, in the previous election session, it grew by 7.2. Now, I think what you can talk about is what happens if there is contestation. What happens if elections lead to disruption of economic activity after? But in the election year itself, in 2013, 5.7% GDP growth. In the 2007, 7.2%. That is the data that is available. Now, I know that, and I see you both, I know the conventional view is that people hold back in an election year. It is not borne out by data. Now, I know what you're saying, that Institute of Economic Affairs saying if you look at 92, if you look at 97, and if you look at previous election years, but I think you have to also say what else is happening in the election year, as opposed to just saying because we have elections, it leads to a slowdown in the economy. Going back to the question of, has Jubilee done better, or the even other question my colleague raises, that we have growth and we don't have jobs. That is not a new story for Kenya, or indeed for any of our economies. Going back to 1972, Yvonne, before we were all born, ILO is looking at this economy and saying we have to figure out a way, because we are growing very fast, but the kind of growth, for example, out of modernizing agriculture, you are shedding jobs. You're not creating jobs. Out of bigger industry, you achieve a lot of growth, but you are not generating as many jobs. Now,
but yet that was Jubilee's promise, though.
Okay, well, let's come back to what Jubilee or even NASA is promising or not. We're just explaining the structure of the economy. You can achieve a lot of growth, but you're not creating as many jobs. So I think we have to turn the conversation to how then can you create many, many jobs. And yes, there are some sectors that have suffered job losses, or are talking about, for example, banks are saying they are reducing the number of people they employ.
That's right.
But that has to do with technology. I don't know when is the last time you went to a bank hall. A year has passed before I've gone to a bank hall, because it's not necessary now. You use...
Okay, so you're saying it's due to market forces, not necessarily Jubilee policy or lack thereof? Is that what you're saying?
It is that automation and technology are making it possible for banks or for other companies to do the same things with less. So, for example, what is the teller that used to serve me, what are they doing now? Since all of us are using technology to whatever.
Okay.
Now, finally, on the question of Jubilee and double-digit growth as well as jobs, I think Jubilee has done reasonably well. Did they attain double-digit growth? Of course they didn't. But I think in the broader scheme of things, Jubilee has done quite well up to where it is.
All right. Simeha, do you agree?
I'm not sure that I would agree with that. I think the question one has to start with is the ideological basis of what we are discussing. Whose economy? Whose growth? Whose development? So if you just talk about figures that we've grown at 6, 7, whatever, 10%, but what does it translate into in realistic terms in people's lives? And I think that is part of what any government, has to think about and ensure that they have in place policies that, that any economic growth, translates into, real benefits to the people, real translates into economic development. Jubilee, you've heard of this saying of megaphone diplomacy. I think Jubilee's economics is megaphone economics. Shout as much as possible, have a lot of noise about huge projects, hope that it will trickle down economics to the people, but it doesn't happen like that.
Okay, on the converse, what does NASA offer, do you think?
I will take what NASA offers from a speech that was done just the other day after they signed the, the alliance agreement. And it's based on the Constitution. Really, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to come up with anything new. We as Kenyans, I know that we negotiated and agreed on the basis of how we want to develop as a country. The people who take the helm of the leadership on this country at national and county level just ought to pick up the Constitution. And if you listened or you read NASA's speech, it is based mainly on Article 43 of the Constitution, social and economic rights. An economy that is based on real things, an economy that is based on supporting small-scale farmers, supporting small-scale industry.
All right, okay.
Yes.
Allow me to interject, because we would like to hear the how.
Yes, absolutely.
From NASA.
Absolutely.
It's talking about social.
Absolutely.
It's talking about,
it's based on social democracy.
Yes,
and
on social democracy. But what is the how? Because
exactly.
we can. It sounds pretty much like the megaphone economics that you're talking about.
The how is there.
Okay.
Instead of borrowing tens or hundreds of billions of shillings and investing in mega projects and hope that in future that it will trickle down to people, to the ordinary mwananchi, based on our tax monies, subsidize and ensure that the price of the basic things that people spend money on does not go beyond their ability to afford these things. That that people are able to afford what they spend most money on. Let's just say unga, for example, fuel, for example, sugar, for example, the very basics.
So what of the macroeconomics, though?
Hold on.
The policy is there.
Subsidize and ensure that people can afford these things, and you leave money in people's pockets, increase their spending power, ensure that people then are able to afford an extra packet of milk and packet of this and that, cleaner fuel and so on. But when you make it so difficult, right now, for the very first time since independence, look at the price of unga. People we eat chapati, but not as much as we eat ugali in this country. But for the very first time under the Jubilee leadership, the price of maize meal, is much higher than the price of wheat flour. Well, let me finish. Don't interrupt me.
I mean,
you had your time.
If you
Okay.
push,
Yvonne, you need
All
to
right,
push.
if you really push,
wind up quickly, then we can allow Nderi to.
No,
Yeah.
Yvonne, please.
Okay. All right,
Look,
Nderi to come in then.
Kenya, we are a high-cost producer of grain. Now, it doesn't matter whether it is NASA or Jubilee in power, or PNU, or Moi administration, or Kenyatta administration before that, or when you and I are president. The fact is, as a producer of grain, we are not very good at it. Why? Because the grains we focus on are temperate, like what he's talking about, wheat. Wheat grows in Ukraine and Brazil. Those are the people who are able to produce it very cheaply. Now, I don't think it is fair to blame any particular administration for things that she will tell you are called comparative disadvantage.
Okay.
That you are not able to do something, as well as, say, your competitor.
All right, and Zeta?
May I say one of the fundamental problems I have with opposition is that they have not made any case in these 5 years as to the question you're asking. Mm-hmm. How would they govern if they were in power? Where is their shadow cabinet? Where is their shadow budget? I am really frustrated as a Kenyan that we get these really quickly developed, manifestos and policies during election year. Then they'll talk about this is what we're going to do. But the reality is that they could have established a track record. We could have known by now what opposition in generally, what their approach would be. Now, when he's talking about, they reduce debt, et cetera, I think one of the problems that we're having that people are not being honest about is that this is the first government under devolution. Devolution is expensive, right? So one of the things we're not being very honest with as Kenyans as well is that we're in a situation where we have a very bloated government structure. So the cost of wages and allowances and just keeping that running is about, I think there was a study that said it's about 115 times what it was under the central system. So that's one story. So whether opposition comes in or Jubilee stays, that story is still going to be there. How do we manage that budget? So what's happening is that we're getting this growing expenditure. Now, when the gentleman talks about revenue generation, we have seen year after year after year, the revenue generation is nowhere near the rate at which expenditure is growing. So unless I hear from both camps, both Jubilee and opposition, as to how we're going to realign fiscal policy to deal with what is becoming a very real structural problem of debt accumulation, not in manifestos or in election promises, but in structured documents and strategy that we can then analyze and give an opinion on.
Simeha?
First of all, in a presidential system, you don't get shadow cabinets. That is for parliamentary system.
I would disagree. We can reinvent the rule.
That is for parliamentary system.
No.
You know.
Well, we do have a parliamentary system.
Yeah.
We do have MPs.
So anyhow, give me my time and let me just finish my point. The point I'm making is that what we need to do for Kenya is not inventing anything new. Is literally just based on the constitution. Investing in, however expensive, as she says, it is investing in implementing the constitution, particularly on devolution. Expensive as it is now, is much cheaper than the kind of runaway corruption that we experience in this country. That if we had invested in devolution and with the coercive power of the state, of the national, particularly the national government.
So you don't think the Jubilee administration has invested in devolution?
No.
Have they not met the constitutional requirement to send
the Jubilee administration has done the bare minimum. The bare minimum.
So what else could they have done?
It could have been invested a lot more money in county governments.
What figures are you looking at?
Hold on. It could have ensured that the rule of law, particularly, that takes precedence. That you don't watch as governors loot the counties, and you just say you act as if you're helpless.
Oh, well, that's a good point. That's a good point to bring into that, especially when you speak about devolution and corruption. Are there any counties under CORD management that, the country would look at and say, that NASA would look at and say, this is a model county. This is exactly what we can replicate on the national scale. And yet, counties, even those under, CORD and NASA governors, are mired in allegations of corruption, mismanagement of funds, not following public procurement procedures, and that sort of thing. So some would say, well, CORD has had an opportunity to be able to show the country how that will be done.
I've had this narrative a lot of times before, but I just want to debunk it. That anytime anyone commits an offense, there are institutions responsible in this country, to take action. One of those institutions is not the leader of the opposition.
But shouldn't CORD itself show an intolerance for corruption within its ranks to start to say that we are the example? I mean, EACC is one thing altogether. And by the way, EACC and Jubilee are supposed to be independent of each other. But surely we should see Raila Odinga or any of the other principals in NASA saying we will not tolerate corruption within our ranks, to be able to give an example.
That is, as far as I know, the principal position of opposition leaders, particularly led by Raila Odinga. The challenge they face is that the culture of political parties in this country does not allow us the privilege of coercive power. The political party as it is right now doesn't have coercive power. If it had coercive power, he and his colleagues would have been able to ensure that the governors under their party, within their party, who commit these offenses of corruption are punished. But unfortunately, it's at the mercy of the executive. It's at the mercy of institutions that are under and part of the executive. That is why they can hardly do anything and have to wait until they mobilize citizens at the next elections to take actions. Okay. Look, listen, I am aware of counties where the leader of the opposition, Raila Odinga, has actually instituted investigation based on allegations of corruption. And instituted investigations.
Could you name some of those?
I can tell you Vihiga County, for example. And come up
and
with
what have been the results of that investigation?
Up with the report, but because of lack of coercive power of the political party, unable to execute the recommendations of that report.
Well, he could easily take that report to the EACC.
And unless this is the time now, as we go to elections. This is why he is mobilizing Wananchi and saying, look, even amongst our own ranks, there are people who need to be punished because of the way they've behaved. And this is not about parties, it's about Kenya.
Okay.
When we talk about the failure of devolution, it's not failing one party and benefiting another party. It's failing all Kenyans equally.
I think it's incorrect to assert that devolution has failed. Devolution has not failed. Now, the constitutional requirement that our colleague talks about is 15% of the last audited financial year.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the numbers, Jubilee has been, providing between 30 and nearly 40% of the previously audited. Now, I know some people make the mistake of looking at the budget of the actual year. So, for example, this year the budget is 2-point-something trillion, and people expect that it is 30% of that year. The Constitution is talking about 30% of the previously audited financial year, and it is not. And it's 30% of ordinary revenue. So the amount that we're actually able to collect in taxes, as opposed to the total budget. They have been doing between 30 and 40%. Now, do we have challenges with devolution? I think the answer is yes. For example, when the county started, the counties in fact nearly caused a recession because the county governments could not actually spend their money in the manner in which they were supposed to. And the money is parked there waiting for them to do it. And you would see the Treasury taking out advertisements in the newspaper saying that in this county, this is the amount there and so on. But that uptake has improved a bit as systems began to take a little bit of settling down. I would also say that we have had challenges with the Constitution in this way. Functions like health that were devolved have turned out to be a challenge. And I must point out, Yvonne, that in the original Kenya Constitution of 1963, we had devolution. Education and health were devolved. And the regions then had very great difficulties in paying, and they would end up with strikes just like we have the doctor strike now. So we have some challenges. There's some fine-tuning to do.
Okay.
However,
Yeah.
devolution, in my estimation, is the best way, in fact,
All
to
right.
go towards social democracy that he talks
All right.
about.
Please just address the challenge very quickly on corruption, because corruption has not just been a challenge at the county level. It's also been, we've seen some mega scandals over the last 4 years at the national level. Billions of shillings, at very serious ministries, going to waste.
On the point of devolution, it's the best system to go towards social democracy
Very
because
true. We agree
you
on
take
that.
the decision to where the people are,
Okay.
they can make their own priorities and so on.
Fair enough.
Let's go to corruption. Let's deal with corruption. Look, I don't think corruption is either a NASA issue or a Jubilee issue or a third wave issue. Corruption is a Kenyan problem, and we, the citizens of Kenya, are partly, in my view, to blame. Look, you go anywhere in this country, and you go to a church harambe, and it doesn't matter whether you've been looting a parastatal and you've bought a big helicopter or a big Range Rover and you show up with it. You are the best friend
All right,
of the bishop because
allow
you
me
can
to
bring
steer the
money
conversation
in big bags.
in this direction.
Yes.
Yes, it is a Kenyan problem, and
So
yes,
what
it
to
is
be
a
done?
human failing. However, the persons at the helm of this country who have the instruments of power and the taxpayers' mandate towards bringing, corruption under control, possibly not an end to it, is the Jubilee administration. And many would say that the buck stops at the president's doorstep.
And I would agree with you
And that
completely.
there have been scandals, even he himself said, even within his own backyard. But yet, there's Kenyans who are disheartened by the billions of shillings they see going to
I
waste.
would agree with you completely that any government, and this particular government, needs to do a lot more. I think we should give credit where it's due when half the cabinet were dismissed because of corruption issues. I think that was an unprecedented step to see in any administration. But should we do more? Yes, we should.
What more should we do?
Yeah.
And Zessa would
May I
like to
step in?
Yeah, and Zessa would like
Shall
to
I
step
say the three? Okay.
very quickly. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
This is three things that we should do more. In fact, four. First, the law prohibited public officers from participating in harambes. We should enforce the law because harambes create a certain dynamic for corruption. Two, go back to procurement because procurement processes, and in fact, if you look at, there's some structural problems inside the way procurement is done because you are using bills of quantities prepared by, say, Ministry of Public Works or the Department of Public Roads and whatever it is now. But in the engineers' estimates themselves are contained certain things, and therefore you need to go back and say,
I'd
so
like to rush you a
remove the
little bit.
structural,
Yes.
remove the structural dynamic for corruption. And in my view, number three, we must go back on the drawing board to say the institutions for fighting corruption are not really working.
Okay.
So can we re-engineer them?
All right. I know Anzesa wants to come in. We'll come to you, Simeha. But the promise to give EACC prosecutorial powers, has Jubilee changed its mind on that?
Well, that promise ought to be kept. And in the parliament that I served, we tried to get prosecutors. You will remember a famous debate when we were being asked how you can measure passion by the late
passionometer.
By the late Honorable Kajwang, because we wanted.
So you
people,
think it should be?
It should be.
Okay.
It should be.
And that's something Jubilee hasn't done over the last.
Well, it has not. It has not delivered on it. The Constitution assigns prosecutorial power to the DPP to the exclusion of everybody else.
Okay.
We may have to revisit the Constitution if we actually want to effect that promise.
Okay, Simeha,
Even
and then
as currently constituted, even if you gave prosecutorial powers to the EACC, I don't think it will achieve anything. But the big point for me is where we are, just about 6 months to elections. I do not think you can be saying that, let's give this government time to do anything. Because on corruption, I don't think it's about to do anything on corruption. What it has not been able to do over the last 4.5+ years, it will never be able to do in about 6 months.
What will NASA do with corruption?
And just a minute, the foremost, if you like, fighter of corruption is the president in a presidential system.
Okay.
The president, because of a political system sets the pace for any country. The political system, you like or not, sets the pace for society. The president says, this is what I expect for my administration, and anybody serving in my government and working with me, they have to meet that threshold. If not, the president has the coercive power, and it has happened in this country. Even these things we call independent constitutional offices. The president has coercive power to call them behind the scenes, away from the cameras, and say, I want your resignation. You are not going to taint my administration.
Well, but some say that is exactly what happened with the previous commissioners at the
The
EACC,
wrong way.
And then they talked about that being interference of the
It didn't happen for good
executive
reasons. It didn't happen for fighting corruption. It just happened for changing the musical chairs, not for fighting corruption.
Okay.
If he wanted to fight corruption, he would not just be talking about this musical thing of dismissing, I don't know, half the cabinet or anything like that. He would insist that anybody serving in the public sector in this country must not taint his image. If he really wanted to fight corruption, must serve in accordance with the expectations of the Constitution and Wananchi.
All right.
And he would put his foot down because our system has immense coercive powers when it comes to the office of the president. He's not using them because he doesn't want to use them.
Okay.
I think there are a couple of things going on. One, it's pretty obvious. If the president doesn't make clear directives and we don't see people being punished, we're going to continue talking about this for another 50 years. I think that's one thing. So that direction from the head is very important. I think the second thing that we need to understand is that, particularly at county level, there are more fingers in the pot. So there are more opportunities for people who previously did not have access to influencing allocations of funds to do that. Point in case, MCAs. I have been looking at studies being done on fiscal policy at county level. And we're looking at where, because of the lack of structures at county, I don't think you understand how serious it is, where there are no financial structures. I've been doing some work with county governments around the country, and one of the CECs straight told me, well, quite frankly, we don't know what to do in terms of getting the actual county governments to adopt the financial systems. People are not even doing internal audits. Financial structures are not being complied to. So there's a flagrant sort of space happening now at the county level, where you can come in, eat, and nothing will happen. Now, what's happening is that national governments, because they have all these allegations of corruption, don't want to be seen to be interfering with county governments and stepping on governors' toes and all of that. So there's that dynamic going on where national doesn't want to be seen to be micromanaging counties. At the same time, the government, I think national government should be playing a stronger role in at least getting county governments to have more financial structures. Because basically what's happening now is that what we're going to see in this election is that I think the real fights are going to happen at county level, not really at national. I think national gets so much scrutiny and so much media, and it affects the Kenya reputation. But what's going on in terms of financial mismanagement there means that you have a pot of gold that basically nobody's going to hold you to account. And I think that's part of that kills the spirit and intent of devolution. And I think that's where the conversation should be as well.
All right, I want us to just do a round of concluding remarks as we wind up our discussion. I'll start with you, Simeha. Make a case right now, and if you can, give some serious policy that Kenyans can look to, some very specifics on why NASA would be better for Kenya's economy than Jubilee or the Tunza Coalition, Third Way, or anyone else that's in the race.
Anyhow, thank you. Look, I do not think we need to look for anything mega, to reinvent the way, look for anything mega. As I said, looking at Section 43 on social and economic rights, talk about investing in at the basic level of, for example, healthcare. Why do we go and invest in equipment that becomes obsolete within months instead of massively investing in primary health care, which puts a lot of money in the tens of thousands of primary health workers, public health workers, community health workers, who deal with the problems that with the primary issues that lead to health problems, but at the same time, because they're in communities, puts money in their pockets, puts money in local economies. Secondly, small-scale farmers. Small-scale farmers produce the most that we consume in this country. It's not about this big wheat and whatever other farmers. It's small-scale farmers. Why completely give them a blackout? Let us invest in supporting small-scale farming. Let us not come up with this again megaphone things of we will give you free fertilizer and things like that. Let us instead subsidize and ensure that the extension services actually work. Ensure that small-scale farmers have access to credit facilities. They're not going to be given by banks, by the way. Forget this thing of capping interest rates. Forget it. They are going to benefit if and when we support cooperatives, that they can actually have access to affordable credit for small-scale workers all over the country. And thirdly, because I can see that you want
time, yes. And I've got 2 more to go.
Yes, because you want me to conclude.
Yeah.
The other thing is housing. One of those social and economic rights. You know, you've got people who are struggling barely to afford food, 2, barely to afford shelter where they stay, and you're talking to them about laptops and what have you that the Jubilee has said it will give us. You're talking about the train, the SGR. Can we invest in things that give people dignity so that there's not a struggle for survival? If you have someone who's struggling for survival, Yvonne, they cannot innovate. They're just thinking, where will I sleep tonight? Where will I get my meal tonight?
All right, so social economic rights from NASA.
Absolutely, social economic rights, based on social democracy.
All right.
Just look at Article 43 of the Constitution and you'll know exactly how NASA is thinking.
All right.
We don't need to come up with any mega new policies and so on. It's all there, it's all in here.
Okay,
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Samiha. Dirty?
Well, unfortunately, the Constitution does not say how you'll pay for the socio and economic rights, unfortunately. Because you see, you have to have production in order to divvy up the goodies as NASA wants. You have to have production. Now, so we go back to the basic questions. Jobs, for example. Part of the big issue of jobs is lack of skills. That is why Jubilee is putting a technical institute in every constituency, so that when young people get to Form 4, they can actually go to a technical institute and get skills that enable them to be effective economic players. I can tell you right now, if you look at masons, for example, or electricians or plumbers, you can't find and yet there are many young men and women who are jobless.
How long does it take to train one?
That is an issue of lack of skills, and that is why we are focused on ensuring that a technical institute in every constituency. Now, we go to the question of agriculture. My colleague fails to point out that most of basic agriculture is devolved. So we need to talk to county governments to ensure that the extension services he's talking about are working. And I agree with him. Mm-hmm. We need to ensure that they work. But it's certainly not the responsibility of the national government. I think the number, 0.3 on why really Jubilee deserves another 5 years is this. It is okay to promise. It's okay to promise. But I think you must promise on the basis of actual things that you are doing. I disagree with my colleague when he says that you're giving laptops to people who are hungry. Look, giving laptops, yes, we have hunger in the country, but ensuring that there's electricity to every household and putting the kids on laptops puts them on an equal playing field as the kids everywhere in urban centers and across the world. That is how to make Kenyans competitive. And it is one thing, I say again, to promise, but you must do actual things that will help put people in a upward trajectory.
Okay. And
for me, it's just 2 things, and I don't care if it's Jubilee or opposition who does this. I think, first of all, we need to focus on manufacturing and really revamping that. Yes, we have the Kenya Industrial Transformation Program, but I think in terms of the details of the specific policies that we need to create, particularly in terms of leading into labor-intensive manufacturing and starting to take over the manufacturing that China is now getting rid of, and a lot of Asia is now getting into more sophisticated manufacturing. We still need those goods here in Africa. Let's build a proper manufacturing policy, identify the subsectors, create policy for that, and then move into African regional markets. I think that should be our strategy. We shouldn't be trying to go to Europe or North America. I think we should. So I think manufacturing. I think the second thing, which both are referred to, is the informal economy. Smallholder farmers are informal farmers. And I think if we don't develop policy and strategy for this sector, we're going to have this conversation forever. And we're going to continue to see parts of the country do very well and parts of the country do very badly. And frankly, what's happening is that because so many people sit in the informal economy, about 80% of employed Kenyans sit in the informal economy, because there's no strategy targeting that and getting them up to speed, they're going to lag behind longer and longer and longer and further. And I think that will cause social unrest that I don't think any administration would want to deal with. So those are the two things, manufacturing and the informal economy. Mainly.
Okay, all right. And we hope to sort of have those conversations as we go forward. Thank you very much. Nderitu Murithi, and Simeha JME. So our question remains, who between NASA and Jubilee offers better economic policies based on the discussions you've heard here tonight? What are your thoughts? Keep them coming in. The hashtag is Checkpoint on Twitter. SMS is 22155. We're taking a quick break. We'll be right back. We have lots more after this.